Hello, welcome back. This is part 2 of my champion rework tier list video. There will be, I guess you could say, continuations to this series. I've decided that I'm going to do a follow-up where I talk about everything in the TBD tier before I go into the individual reviews of my reworks, going through the actual essays on Medium, my designs, and then talking a little bit about the work that I've done since in the past 2 years, since the last time I posted, of course, on my Medium blog. If you are not familiar with this series, this is a series that is a continuation. Hello, free publicity. Awesome, awesome. If I can find the correct tab. Let's try this. Awesome. Here we go. The previous video was had this thumbnail over here, and is where I talked about the first half of the champions. Those being everything beneath C tier, I believe. As you can see, many things have changed around since the last video. So, today's video, what are we doing? Some things have changed around because I had a day or two to think about my feelings. Start at 1 minute and 26 seconds. Hello, so this is video number 2 of 2 for my champion rework tier list. And I decided I'm going to do a continuation of this series where I, at the very least, detail all of my ongoing rework endeavors, or the champions that you see in the TBD tier. In detail, these would be the things that I've worked on my own privately. Everything's on my own, actually, but the things that I've worked on privately in the 2 years since I last posted. I have this list ordered, and for this video, I did some restructuring and had some time to think about everything on the list in terms of how I feel with self-appraisal, critiquing myself, and currently for the TBD tier, I have them ordered in terms of, I guess you can say, like, how hype I am about the designs that I've come up with so far, and how well I think they do in terms of the old criteria of if these were released today to League of Legends, um, would they be successful reworks, or at the very least maybe not successful in terms of widely received, approved of, and excited? Would people have a lot of fun with these designs? Would they be very compelling? And maybe in a better sense, if these were new champions, completely new champions released, not replacements for old ones, could they pass as authentic and enjoyable League of Legends designs? And do I see people having fun with them in terms of here's a similar fantasy or a different packet, the same fantasy packaged in a different way, but with a different name, different coat of paint. And of course, at the front of that, you can see Belveth here. It's actually interesting in the Riot August video. He talks a little bit about how he views Belveth in terms of a failure of the imagination in a technical sense, in terms of, hey, like we have this champion and it gives off certain ideas, but it doesn't actually, she doesn't actually translate really well when you actually play her. So let's go into this actual tier list here. So I don't know exactly what's changed from yesterday. I don't remember the exact placements, but I do believe I ended off with, I just need to talk about Syndra, Vel'Koz, and things moving forward from there. I actually did finish recording that video. I said that I needed to get off soon in the recording, if I remember correctly. I actually did end up staying on a few more minutes and making it to my next meeting a little bit late. But it seems that the file for that got corrupted and the recording stopped exactly at 5 o'clock. I think my alarm for that meeting went off, and that's might have what caused the recording to stop. But my laptop actually was getting really hot. Side note, if you enjoy my videos, enjoy my content, and just enjoy listening to me talk, feel free to look at my Patreon. You can send me your thoughts, messages, mail, maybe even some money if you want to subscribe for my more personalized and private essays. And it'll help me buy a new laptop, and I really appreciate that. But of course, also everything on my Patreon is free. You can look at my long form content from years ago, and also a few things that I've posted since, just privately and not on any of my more public blogs and things like that with more followers. So I have an order here. I need to talk, again, I'm redoing the video that got cut off, unfortunately. I need to talk about Syndra. I'm going to talk about Syndra first. Syndra. I think if Nocturne is my most transcendent design, to quote Riot August, that being something that like it seems or feels like I went out of my own mind or I went above and beyond myself to design, and the adequacy of the design is something that is just as much about the design itself as it is the connotations of it and the capturing the fantasy. It's like not something I could have made on my own. I think that Nocturne is kind of like the culmination of my 10 plus years playing League of Legends, and all of just like the vibes that I've absorbed positively. I think Syndra is very much approaching that, and with maybe one or two more passes, she could be that with the current design I have on my blog. Um, Spoiler alert: Syndra would be a TPD champion if I hadn't actually posted about her yet. In the 2 years since I last posted, I actually have pretty much written and finished in my personal notebook. I thought it was close to here. Yeah, so I have a just an everyday journal, write about dreams, poetry, heartbreak, art, things like that. I actually do have a finished, pretty much polished update version of Syndra's rework. I think it functions at the level of a mid-scope update for in the way that Ryan talks about things in terms of like, Mel Medarda was released. Mel Medarda wasn't really successful in a balance and pick rate and things like that sense, um, and needed some work, and that happened recently. And I would do the same with Syndra if I were to release my previous version from my blog onto live, because I think in her current state she's too convoluted, and I'll kind of scroll along as I go here. Too convoluted and could be streamlined a little bit more. I talk a lot about my inspirations and a lot about like why I she could change or why I would want her to change, what direction that would go into, and what justifies that. A lot of these things ultimately are very idiosyncratic and very personalized, very endemic to me and my viewpoint. I talk a little bit here about how Syndra's dominion over dark matter, dark energy, again, just speaking like visually, aesthetically, to me, the connotation, the vibe that I am imparted is like, oh, like that's a gravity mage. Oftentimes in development, Riot Games uses like code words for certain characters, or like, and things that usually begin with like initial motifs or like conceptions. So Set, for instance, was, I don't remember his name. I don't remember a lot of the things that I've absorbed over the years. But I can imagine that, like, like in development, Set was like brawler, wrestler, um, pit boss. And for me, Syndra is kind of gravity mage. She uses dark matter or anti gravity energy. That is like the most natural, compelling, maybe somewhere in between vibe, or I guess perspective that I get when I think of Syndra, what she does, how she does it, how she functions. I want to talk a little bit about like the Scarlet Witch from Marvel, a little bit of like Phoenix, Dark Phoenix. Anyway, had a passive here that I designed that basically said, in battle, kind of like Irelia, as she hits abilities, she gains more stacks up to 7. And at certain thresholds, aka 3, 5, and 7, she gets bonuses to her abilities. At 3 stacks, she gets cooldown reduction every time she hits an enemy champion with her Q. So it's kind of like Ezreal Q. And at 5 stacks, something else, increasing levels of power happen. Since then, and I'll talk about this more in Syndra's dedicated video, um, I found ways to make this simpler, not necessarily reducing power, but making like the way it's presented and the way it manifests simpler, easier to understand, and easier also to, more importantly, play around for enemies, opponents. I'm really popular, or sorry, I'm really partial to the new abilities that I created. I think like dark spears are cool. Being able to use multiple of them and affect both of them at the same time is really cool. But being able to do more things with them that imply a mastery over energy and over matter is something that's a little bit lacking for me in Syndra. One of the things that I did is I took away her ability to pick up minions and targets and things like that. because while it is cool and it is unique, I saw it as a potential place to give her more ways to manipulate the unique energy that she wields. And I just think that there are many ways that Syndra's fantasy in game can go deeper, as opposed to how broad it kind of is right now. I think her gameplay can get become somewhat deep contextually, but very much so it's like she suffers from success insofar as that the stronger she is, the she has to work exponentially less to be successful. And there are other champions that we see that with. For instance, Rengar, LeBlanc. LeBlanc just looks at you when she's super fed, and she jumps at you and you die. There's, I think, really strong counterplay for that. Um, most of the time, Rengar is the same. If he can get to you, then you're dead. Um, but the patterns and the ways that opponents can respond to it still apply. Whereas with Syndra, she can have her way with you, and that's kind of thematically on point. But I think it can get really unfair, and it's also just going to get really boring for me as a player. When I play Syndra, I oftentimes are really bored when I do really well. And I also feel like the things that I can do when I'm really fed or when I play really well and I'm rewarded for playing really well, aka getting fed, aren't really that much cooler or more exciting than what I can just do at base. Syndra does a lot of cool things conceptually, but the actual execution of her mechanics, the actual way that her fantasy is translated into gameplay, is pretty flat. Um, so one of the things that I did with a new ability is I had one ability where you take a dark sphere, you sacrifice it, and you compress it, and then you throw it out, kind of like a Vex E, and it travels, and when it gets to its destination, it explodes in a huge explosion, and it has a CC component to it if it's caught in the explosion. And it goes out and it moves really slowly, and it can also be detonated manually for the same damage, meaning it'll explode prematurely, but it'll not have the same utility as the manual, as the 3-second delayed trigger. Um, I also changed it so that her E is not an instantaneous hard CC. I made it so that you have to knock a ball into an opponent, and then the opponent is knocked back because of that, or because of the wave, but they have to get hit by a ball specifically and be knocked back, and then hit a wall in order to be stunned. Elsewise, they are just going to be slowed instead by either by the ball hitting them that is knocked back, and then Syndra gets a speed up for that. And I thought it was really interesting to make Syndra her her power fantasy more about like this concept of freedom. Like she's uninhibited, she's unrestricted, unrestrained, and so in combat she gets faster. Her movement speed is faster. She plays as if she has kind of like a built-in what is that headset item? I'm not remembering the name, but the AP health ability haste movement speed item that is hotly debated to be too broad and needs to be changed every season. Um, Kind of like Irelia, her attacks get stronger and she attacks faster the more she hits you with abilities and call it. I would love to speak more about this design in her. I will speak about it more in depth because there's just so much for me to say, and I think that that video will be really exciting when I talk about my new design. I think this would be my third or fourth redesign of Syndra. But all in all, I just think that like Syndra should be complex. She should be very technical. She should maybe not live and die in a literal sense, but she should kind of live and die by how like locked in you are as a pilot, as a player, and how well you can like use your tools, kind of like a Aphelios, use the right tools to suit the situation. Um, and that all the strength she gets, she should be a very high power champion. She should be able to delete people, but she should get that not by the nature of just being inevitable and being able to brute force her way to you, but by a little bit of give and take, a little bit of surviving. One of the main things driving my design philosophy or my redesign philosophy and this hobby of mine is this idea of checks and balances, and specifically an axis of like cost and benefit, and then strengths and weaknesses. So where does champion strengths come from? And then how do we contrast those strengths with meaningful weaknesses? So for instance, with Aatrox that I believe I talked about in the last video, I would selfishly love to see him as like a glass cannon, kind of like a Tryndamere, but a Tryndamere that doesn't have an ult that makes him unkillable. Something that he hits you extremely hard, and the way that you make that work in a gameplay way that he doesn't just like go in and die, like a really bad Zed or Talon player, is that he controls so much space because he has a giant sword that has large hitboxes, and when he ults, he just gets like extreme levels of spell vamp or omni vamp, and so he heals, he drain tanks quite literally through the damage that is dealt back to him. And so if he can combo and land his knockups, then he'll survive because he'll spell vamp more and do more damage. Otherwise, he's hard pressed to definitely not be the first person to engage, and definitely not go on at a time in which his opponents can retaliate or get away, because if he misses his combo, then he's a sitting duck and all he has is damage. So he can't just stand there and auto attack. Um, so the benefit of the new Aatrox in my design is that he does a lot more damage and can be played like a maybe a very slow assassin, but a glass cannon juggernaut. A juggernaut, he is a juggernaut, but a different kind. Um, and the cost of that is that he will die much more frequently, much easier. His strength is that he controls area surrounding him. He has a large zone of threat, and he has pretty decent target access. His ult gives him the speed up. I kept that. He has dashes, one dash, but it has a really decent recharge rate. And his weaknesses are that he does not deal damage very quickly. He can be a very high DPS champion if he gets multiple hits on enemies at the same time with one cast. But he is not very fast. He has some speed, but doesn't have much. He does not do damage very quickly, and he doesn't have any inbuilt defenses. He doesn't have like a Galio taunt that gives him damage reduction. He doesn't have a Riven dash that also gives her a shield, which goes off her offenses and things like that. So this matrix of what do you want and what are you going to give up for it, and making that very clear to players, from a both like a reading standpoint, but also from a flavor standpoint. Like, oh, you like this character because they do this, and you don't really mind that they give up X, Y, and Z to do that thing because you're compelled by this. So players know this is why this is my favorite. This is why I main this. This is why I stand this character. And the people who don't like these things will, find other characters to gravitate towards, because in my redesigns, the characters will be sharper. All the characters will be sharper overall. I'm a huge fan of if everyone's super, no one is. League is a game that Riot Intercept talked about this. Like every character, every champion has something that they uniquely do. That's something that they can do unfairly. This is a accepted part, maybe not like a widely known or widely like talked about part of League of Legends champion design. But like the idea is that they're all supposed to be champions. They're their own protagonists. They are legends, quite literally. And the reason for that is because it usually relates to like how unique or how unlike any other person in the universe that they are. Look, Aurelian Sol is, visually speaking, kind of a generic dragon, Eastern dragon, but his motif is that he is unique because he is one of one, insofar as he controls reality in a physical sense, being that he is the creator of matter. And so we see that reflected in his gameplay, and that he can, he blows star matter at you and can create black holes, the things that we associate with like greater cosmology and things outside of human control and influence. We live and we die by the sun providing us with its energy, and black holes staying away as far as possible for as long as possible. So anyway, I think the design intentions for Syndra are here in this, but she needs to be made more clear, and it's just a little bit too clunky. But check out the essay on the blog for more of that. This is why I've removed Syndra to this. I truthfully feel that if or when I do post the third or fourth rework, let's actually check. Let's see, how many hits for Syndra do we have here? We have two matches, October 15th and May 2024. So 2022 and 2024. So this will be my third remake. And something that I talked about in my previous videos, I have drafts. I have more drafts than I have published stories on this blog. And I have even more published things on my Patreon, so check that out if you're interested. I've started making a lot of things free and easily visible because I decided I want to do content creation seriously, and I want to take my game design journey and my game design education very seriously as well. And I view having this personal journal. I treat like my online footprint kind of like a journey journal, development journal. So there's even more there on Patreon if you're interested. That being said, I want to I'm making this video series to kind of like tease things that I'm going to make public in the future. And so I have my third to send your rework. Wow, let me drink some water. And so I have my third Sendra rework in the works, probably at the top of my drafts. On Medium, you won't not be able to see it until I publish it, but stay tuned for that notification. When I would do that, I would say that Sendra would probably be up here after Kennen. She'd definitely be in the top 5, but as it is now, what I have in my mind is awesome. I'm much more proud of it. What I have here is a pretty decent first draft, which should tell you how, everything below B tier, I feel. Moving on to Vel'Koz. Vel'Koz, in a nutshell, is kind of the same. A really, really, really good first draft. There are a lot of things that I would change from the design that Azap reviewed. Azap said it was a really, really good stuff in the right direction, I think, and probably one of the best ones that he saw. Thank you again for that, Azap. And I have the gift of hindsight now, many years later, that yeah, like I agree. I mean, I definitely agreed before, but now I agree even more fervently that, for instance, the W that I gave Vel'Koz was such that it is kind of like Kog'Maw R or Kassadin R, where it has a very, very low cooldown, in this case 1.5 seconds. It can just be spammed. Concerned here was that it would do too much damage, and so I nerfed a little bit of the damage for wave clear purposes. But the idea here is that Vel'Koz is much sooner to go and therefore not be a threat than he is to exert too much pressure as a strength by the nature of being able to shove in waves. And even if he, is able to shove in waves relatively too easy in the early game with this cooldown buff, he still is a skill shot based champion and therefore needs to, if he's going to gank things in roam, he still needs to hit his abilities around minions and things like that. So I wasn't very concerned. I also gave this ability a passive that would reduce the ultimate's cooldown every time it hit a researched enemy. I think that this is a little bit clunky and, like would be thematically really cool to have some kind of ultimate reduction mechanic on his kit, because his ultimate is like the highest, probably one of like the biggest hype moments in the game for me. It's like one of those abilities that's just like, yeah, like this is why I play League of Legends. This right here is so much fun. It's so fun to do this, and I want to do it as much as possible. Because even if I do it poorly, it's just like, who cares? I'll do it again in 60 seconds or a minute, 2 minutes. And so more dopamine would be great in that regard. But I think that the most important part of his kit that in my redesign is the researched mechanic, which is something that already exists in the game. And what that is that when Vel'Koz gets 3 stacks of his abilities on you, you take a big chunk of true damage, and then for a few seconds you are researched. What the research mechanic does in game is that if you have been hit by that true damage in trigger recently and you become marked, Vel'Koz's ultimate will have all of its damage converted to true damage against you instead. So all the magic damage that it would do is converted to true damage, and then it still procs the 3-hit passive while doing that. But it's going to do more damage, almost guaranteed to always do more damage, because there's no resistance you can buy against true damage, whereas you can against magic damage. That being said, I thought it'd be really cool to extend this idea of, if he is successful at spell slinging and accurately, chaining his abilities to hit you within that time period, instead of him only having his ultimate buffed against you, he could have all the rest of his abilities buffed. And thematically, this would be this goes along with his thematic of desiring knowledge and desiring to understand things, and the way that, kind of like a shark, the shark only like has its like mouth and teeth to interact with things primarily. Its nose is very sensitive too, but like its primary means of interacting with the world and in fact, like coming upon understanding is by essentially, chewing, biting, things like that. A little bit of sniffing. Vel'Koz has his tentacles and he has his lasers. He's all about deconstructing matter, and also knowledge for knowledge's sake. So what if, for instance, instead of just doing more damage when he ults you, what if against research targets they got more stacks from his Q, um, because he understands it now. So he's able to apply more pressure, or work around the resistances. Maybe it's like, think about like a Pokemon metaphor, where it's like, oh, like I'm playing Protean Kecleon. I'm up against some dark type, so I have a fighting type move, and then it switches to, or then they switch, whatever, and now I'm immune to ghost types. It's changing the context to make itself more effective. I guess it was just worked the other way around. I was dark type, and then they brought in a ghost type, and maybe dark type still effective against ghost types. But if I become fighting type, now I'm immune to the opponent's move. So in this case, it's a defensive application. My point is that, like, if Vel'Koz were a real creature, it would be an apex predator by way of being able to constantly change its nature of its being to alter itself, or maybe it's just to alter the context of its surroundings and environments in order to always succeed and thrive. Kha'Zix is like the adapt or change, like physically evolve your body kind of way. I think of Vel'Koz as a physically evolve your equipment, evolve your artillery, evolve your weaponry. In this case, it's just energy-based weaponry instead of like claws or wings that you can sprout from your body at will. Anyway, yeah. So what if instead of one stack per ability, maybe your Q before the two orbs split, if the first shot of the two orbs hit you, you take two stacks because it is two projectiles visually, even though only does one instance of damage. And then something that Azap liked a lot was like, what if Vel'Koz did more damage with his split, aka the geometry, the Pythagorean theorem ability, the further he was away from you, like a trick shot bonus. I added that, except that now you have to be researched first. So Vel'Koz would have had to have comboed you with his 3-hit passive first, before also hitting you with a trick shot. But how much more satisfying can you make it such that I hit you with my 3-hit combo, and then I hit you with a fadeaway trick shot for the extra missing health damage, from literally half a screen away, around curving the bullet around minions. Very satisfying, very skill based, very interactive because the opponent still can dodge. Um, Especially since Q is usually a primary means of applying 3-hit passive, it's almost impossible to get the 3-hit passive without alt if you don't hit the Q first. So a Q would be on cooldown, and you would require, still being on screen, a screen's distance away, less than a screen's distance away from the opponent, in order to get another Q hit while the passive is still applied. So there's still some intentionality designed, in that regards, for the interaction between opponent and player. I also don't think that is really interesting. I gave it a new CC effect if you get hit a researched target, and all in all, I have a lot of things that I would change about this. I'd still keep the extra effects upon research the same, but I definitely give something more interesting to W and E's mechanics. For instance, what if when you hit a grounded opponent, sorry, you hit an opponent that is researched with W, um, the W will also apply grounded, like Cassio's W, so that while they're on the W, they cannot dash. Now you could say that's really, really powerful, but in this case, like, you already would have had to hit them with a 3-hit passive, and then you have a limited amount of time to continue to apply pressure after that while the mark is still on them before the mark expires. And then the grounding only applies while they're standing on it. Maybe think of it as like he opens a portal to the rift, or dimensional fissure, and maybe the argument there is like, oh yeah, on the rift or in the void, gravity's heavier, or maybe he's putting something on the ground with his energy that is forcing gravity to multiply. Something energy based, something sci-fi, but like altogether believable because he is this energy based and also hyper intelligent life form that like defies physics. He just floats in the air and he floats around. He doesn't have a stomach. He doesn't have a mouth. He's just an eyeball. How does he live? Right? Many different justifications there. Aside from the passive, my favorite part of the this design was nerfing the alt to buff the alt. And what I mean by that is that the alt slow is lowered, but then it increases against research targets the closer they are to Vel'Koz. And I think of it as like, well, you can't walk up a waterfall. Like, it is a laser that is shooting you in the face. I can't imagine you can just like run through it super quickly, even if you're Garen with Swifties and your Q active. It should have a little bit more utility baked in, just more so for the Vel'Koz player in terms of like, oh, I got this Garen really, really, really low, and then I put my passive on him, so now he takes true damage, so his W doesn't even matter. I ulted him, um, but like he just ran at me, Q'd me, stopped my ult because the Q silences me, and now I'm dead. This is specific to Garen, but I don't think it's hyper specific to the game because Vel'Koz is countered by so many things. You have CC, you have displacement. You know, if you get knocked out of your ult's over, and there's your main damage source. So you know, making it a little bit harder for Garen to literally run straight at you, or you know, volley bear whoever you know has a movement speed buff, and isn't relying, you know, who isn't Riven and just can like dash nonstop. Um, to do that, I think just makes sense. I think it's a thing that is in line with the rest of his abilities. Like his Q already does this, and it's kind of deserved to him because he's you know suffered so much for having the kinds of strengths that are severely devalued and diminished over time because of the design ethos of the game, which is that this game is one that promotes the um, power creep over time, and mainly power creep, at least by way of mobility. So over time, there's just more mobility added to the game, and the more percentage of characters in the game have access to mobility than don't. So for those that don't, arguably speaking or relatively speaking, you could make the argument that like they are growing weaker overall, um, which is you know like why we see things like Oriana getting her ult buffs year after year after year, way back when they wanted her when she escaped pro play and they wanted her to be back in pro play and they just kept buffing her numbers. Um, yeah, so that's all about Vel'Koz. I'm very much looking forward to him being back in or my TBD, you know, theoretical TBD tier video when I talk about my next rework of him that is pretty much finished as well, similar to Syndra. After that, we have Kinnan. Kinnan is kind of the same problem, but not because he's much more polished. If like Syndra needs one more, like if Syndra needs a mid scope update, Vel'Koz needs a mid scope update. Kinnan needs a very small, like just some small, like Mel. I'd say Mel technically formally was a mid scope update, but really it was just like a lot of numbers changes. It was just the speed of projectiles, it was mostly just numbers. Whereas I would actually keep the core of the abilities for Syndra and Vel'Koz, I'd keep the same. Vel'Koz's abilities wouldn't change in their functionality at all. They'd be the same exact abilities. Syndra's abilities would actually change. But functionally speaking, like Vel'Koz's abilities would have their CC effects, their profiles changed. Um, Kindred would be really similar. And here's why. So the idea for Kinnan is that he has a 3-hit passive now, but instead of stunning opponents when they get 3 hits of 3 marks of the passive, his next auto attack against that opponent with 3 marks causes them. His next auto attack causes them to get stunned and some other things. A new thing, a new CC called paralysis. The CC paralysis is really cool. Basically, all it does, it's something that I created off, you know, on my own. It's an original thing. It doesn't exist in the actual League of Legends. Is it causes ability cooldowns to pause for a time period. So if I'm Zed and I have a 6-second Q, and I use my Q, and then you know Kinnan hits me with paralysis, and the paralysis value, just like a slow, you know, slow for 2 seconds, stun for 2 seconds, whatever, is 2 seconds. That means my QCD is now effectively 8 seconds because I get hit, let's say like frame perfectly, I get hit with something that causes me paralysis, and then I use my Q on the exact same frame after, or you know, the exact same frame. Now my Q is on cooldown. Normally it'd be 6 seconds, but my cooldown is going to be frozen in place for 2 seconds. So now I have to wait 8 seconds to use Q again. I think this is a really interesting way to what's the term? Diversify CC profiles in League. It's like on the one hand you have mobility creep where it's like, oh, like everyone has a dash, everyone can move around the speed of light. And then on the other end you have like, oh, like CC isn't strong enough to fight this, but also a lot of like super early champions from the beginning of the game's lifespan like can do absolutely horrendous like criminal things that make them feel like they're in a different game, but also like make it feel worse for the enemy than the new champions that have dashes. So it's like Morgana can snare you for 3 seconds. Um, you having 15 dashes doesn't matter. Of course, that can happen to anyone, and it's going to happen less to people with 15 dashes because they have, maybe they use 7 of them. They still have 8 to dodge the Morgana binding. Um, but this would be a way to, have power in this ecosystem that isn't exclusively tied to directly being a counter to mobility. So paralysis would apply to all cooldowns, not just dashes, for instance. Grounding snares counters dashes, so do stuns technically. Slows do not counter dashes. Um, but if you're a champion that does not have any dashes, then it might as well counter dashes because it's just as strong or effective at making you weaker than it is not, or than it's just as effective than a snare would be to someone with a dash. You're losing your ability to dodge things equivalently. So yeah, that's Kennen's passive, and all of his abilities would be changed to be different to reflect. I gave him like this in my revisualization of his character. I gave him a new motif of like Yunara and Kennen are supposed to be like these super ancient, not super ancient, but like very old beings that are like very spiritually in tune with themselves and in tune with their environments, and they derive their power from like spiritual energy and spiritual cultivation. And so I was like, well, Kennen has like this electricity motif, which feels kind of like it's cool. But it feels kind of random and out there in terms of like not being attached to any of his peers, or attached to like any of the motifs that like surround him otherwise. So I was like, oh, like what if he uses spirit magic and he's kind of like the Avatar, because he kind of like is like that level of authority in universe, from my understanding. He's kind of like the Avatar, where he uses like he can use different kinds of spirit magic the way the Avatar does. So like maybe he's like his magic is like all about spirituality, and he can make it like um, mold it into different forms. So it's like, and those forms represent the weather, for instance. And you think of like the weather, like the internal reality of like the inner mind. Again, this is like just head canon. I was like, oh yeah, he has like rain magic, and then he has thunder magic, and then he has wind magic, because he's all about, you know, spirituality. Like, in your spirit sometimes it's raining, in your spirit sometimes it's thundering, in your spirit sometimes there's wind, and it's all just like metaphorical. But he's able to weaponize those metaphors of emotion, to do supernatural things with martial arts. So yeah, gave him a Chidori, and then I gave him, I think I have a gif here. I gave him a Janemba's weird needle thing. Okay, I gave him Chidori. I gave him Chidori Senbon, which is the needles. Um, and then I gave him, instead of having his speed up on his E, I just gave him a dash, a short range dash that he can use repeatedly. Very worth reading about. Again, this is one of my most after Nocturne. I think this is actually like my proudest design after Nocturne. Draven being third, and then if I say things that are like in the works right now, I think Sendro would be my third, for like when that gets finished and posted. That would actually be my third proudest design, with of course Nocturne being the first, and then Draven being second. So yeah, I think that Kennen is definitely overdue for a VGU, just like Shyvana was until recently. And in my version, he wields different abilities that represent the different kinds of magic he has access to, as a byproduct of being like really ancient, really rehearsed, very disciplined in practice. He's a master in his own regard, and so he's able to do different things with his in universe's magic system because of that. I also thought it'd be really cool if Kennen's alt followed him around, kind of like Victor's alt, and then lasted longer, kind of like Swain's alt. Um, I think it's really worth reading the actual post that I have, the actual design on the blog, because I know that probably sounds like extremely busted and dangerous. The counterbalances that I have there is that he needs to do things to make it last longer. It's not just unlimited for unlimited sake, and those doing things aren't just getting kills, like Victor and Swain, or like Victor and Lysandra. He needs to like actually like have skill checks, and those skill checks being proc his passive, which, like I mentioned before, you have to auto attack them to actually stun them and then proc the passive. You don't just like have to hit abilities. And so he kind of be like Irelia in that way. He has to like move around and attack different targets and be nimble in order to achieve maximum effectiveness. Um, or I guess it's kind of be like a Mundo with Heartsteel actually, more so than Irelia, but a Mundo if he had Irelia's dashes. Um, anyway, point being there, I think Kunin needs one more pass to for cohesion. I wrote some notes to myself actually here, and I totally forgot about them. Sender's too convoluted, and Kinnan needs a little bit more polish, a little bit of cohesion. Same thing for Vokaz, although Vokaz that definitely changed a bit more. That's it for Kinnan. Looking at Draven, I mentioned this is my second most proud. As you see, I reordered this in terms of like it's kind of like leads the least amount of work, and or like how strongly I feel, like how proud I am about these designs. Combination of the two was what led me to do a little bit of reordering over the past 2 days. So Draven here is so interesting to me because I think I set out to do very specific things, and then I was actually able to do those in what reads is a very satisfying way. Draven and Nocturne are definitely the ones that's like if I could join Riot today, and and the day that I got hired, they're just like, all right, newbie, we have a project for you, remake this character. These two designs are the two designs that I'd be most proud of. I'd be like, cool, boss, I'm already finished. Like, here it is, it's done. Like, I'm so confident. Like, tear it to shreds, you won't find anything wrong with it, or you'll barely find anything wrong with it. This could exist tomorrow, and who knows? It might only be like 40% run rate. It might be 60% run rate. But that would just be a numbers problem. It wouldn't be like this thing does not work and or people don't like it. On the whole, I think a lot of people would like it, and I'm definitely one of them. So one of my goals with Draven were manifold. I had three main things here. I love the juggling aspect of his character, and I think that he could be pushed a little bit further in terms of like why does he juggle, and it's like because he's a bloodthirsty showboat and combat junkie. If he's going to be a showboat and a contract junkie, we should play more into that, as opposed to just having it be like some sound and video, some SFX cues that play whenever he gets a kill. It's cool to hear the cheering, but like pump it up, make it more of his character. I think Draven's character is kind of off the mark for what would be healthy for the game right now. And that has been for years. It's like he's fully around snowballing, and I think that he could offer more to his teammates, even though he's supposed to be selfish. I think like he doesn't have to help his teammates to offer them more. He doesn't have to help his teammates to like not be selfish either. So I think that in a nutshell, think of it like ranged Olaf. Olaf doesn't help his teammates, but ranged Olaf is exactly it was like the mood board when I made this design. So you can think of it as like a ranged Juggernaut. And the last thing I want to do is to bring back the bleeding from his super duper old kid. So real OGs will remember that. Anyway, so the way that I did that is that I gave him a Jhin passive, and this Jhin passive is really interesting and really, 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 really cool to me. I think Draven probably wouldn't be as popular without updated visuals and SFX and all that kind of stuff as Jhin is, and Jhin deserves to be the most popular champion in the game next to Yasuo and Akali and the rest of them. But the way that this new passive works is that Draven cannot critically strike. He can build critical strike chance and it will do things for him. However, his auto attacks will not show you exclamation point, number as a product of him having crit items. Instead, his crit items give him bonus AD, bonus attack damage. It's really simple. It's 1-to-1. So if he has 100% crit chance, he gets 100% bonus AD, and he just doubles his attack damage. And then his basic attacks that would normally critically strike cause their targets to bleed for 4 seconds, and the bleed does physical damage as a factor of their missing health. Auto attacks against bleeding targets that trigger this again just refresh it. It doesn't stack the way the old passive does. It doesn't stack, but it does refresh. Against bleeding targets that are under 50% health, Draven will actually heal for the post mitigation damage done by the bleed, This is very similar to Aatrox. Like you do damage, and then a percent of the damage that you actually did, like, after like armor, you will heal for. And the idea there is like, he's bloodthirsty. He loves the thrill. He loves seeing like, oh, this person's struggling. This person's running from me. This person's bleeding. I'm doing my job really well. I am a threat. I'm a big deal. I'm kind of a problem, you know? And then lastly, he gets bonuses to his W based off his crit chance. All of his abilities, his active abilities, are the same, Q, W, E, R. Differences here is that his Q has a very similar effect to his passive. Against champions with under 50% HP, uh, his Q, his juggling axes, his wicked axes that are spinning, if you hit them with a spinning axe, they will bleed if they're under 50% health. Always. Doesn't matter if it crits or not. They'll always bleed. I mean, I can imagine Universe White changed that, so it's like spinning axes always cause bleed instead of regular basic attack crits always bleed. That would be like much more skill focused, or that would be more skill focused and more skill positive, and rewarding in that way than how it is currently. And if I were to do a single pass, I probably would do that because I find that more compelling in terms of I want to emphasize like the player's ability to do good and to make good on the things that they can control in exchange for caring less and being rewarded less for the things that they can't control. So like this character, this version of this character will do a lot of damage. It'll be slow, kind of like Aatrox, but they will do a lot of damage. If they're able to play well and juggle, which is what the specific fantasy of this character, of this, this design asks you to do, is to micromanage your movement, and to navigate danger by way of a mini game, then they will be rewarded with even more damage. I think that makes sense for the character, and I think that makes sense for health. And rather than, oh, he does less damage overall in exchange for having his less skillful damage, aka just regular crit auto attacks, do more damage. So I'd love to see like that sharpening where it's like, okay, the things that require more skill and presence of mind and difficulty, or ask more difficult things of the player, are rewarded even heavier, and the things that don't are rewarded even less. That's something I think I would do with the next pass. Um, Oh, and then the spinning axes do true damage instead of physical damage. That's what I was saying in terms of like ranged Olaf slash Juggernaut attacks, not as fast, but yada yada yada. So the bonuses to his W are that with crit chance he gets slow resistance. It starts at 25% at 0 crit chance, and it goes up to plus 50% at 100 crit chance, meaning he gets 50% of his crit chance gets added to his slow resistance, or at 100% crit chance his W on activation will give him 75% slow resistance, meaning so that slows just really won't affect him. This means that if you want to play Crit Draven, you should probably max W second, which might sound normal, but if you look at E, well, and also his passive now, the bleeding scales off of lethality, and not a bonus AD. I think I might give it a small bonus AD if I were to redo this, but it scales off of lethality because I want to enable lethality like two shot and axiom arc, ultimate spell singling, hash singling slasher Draven. If you were doing a lethality Draven, you might want to max E instead, because just like Vel'Koz Q, it gets its slow duration increased, meaning that if you hit an enemy with E, it's not going to do a lot of damage. It actually scales, so if you want to do more burst damage, you definitely want to max the second, because otherwise it's not going to do any damage and it's barely going to slow. You get a whole extra second after maxing it. And the damage is not crazy because I still want the Draven player to have to play the minigame, to have to engage with the opponent and take risks in order to do damage. So this is not allowed to do a lot of damage for that reason. But it's going to give you the utility you need to secure those kills and set up those kills to begin with. And then the cool thing about the R here is that it does not a lot more damage. It does more damage on average because I change it to match Ezreal's ult, so that it's not good at farming at all. You're not going to farm cross map minions. It always does 50% reduced damage to minions, and then the damage fall off for champions and epic monsters is stronger. So like the first is going to be here. Let me see, what do I have here? 15%? No, a little bit less. 12.5, I think. So scales. Oh, sorry, 10% says it right there. So enemy champion or large monster, sorry, enemy champion or epic monster, yes, will reduce the damage by 10%. So you really want, if you're doing this cross map or even a screen away to get a enemy that's running away from you on like 0 HP or 1 HP, you really want this to be the first, second, maybe third thing you hit. But if you hit an enemy that's bleeding from your passive, this will refresh the bleed. And of course, it still does a lot of damage, which I don't think a lot of people realize it does a lot of damage. Draven, AK-47 Draven, I don't remember that YouTube channel's name, but that guy that does really cool montages, that person, I don't know if you're a guy or girl, sorry about that. They definitely play a lot of Lethality Draven, which they're inspiration for that. And I think that this would just be a really fun refresh on the fantasy that Draven proposes, and a really different way to approach, or a new way for different people to approach this character. You're going to get more crit play, or you're going to have a different way to play crit, but then you're also going to have more ways to play. Like, for instance, they thought it would be much more valid in this sense. And you might see some mid lane or some top lane Dravens in that sense. Maybe you even see some jungle. I would definitely think jungle Draven should be a valid thing. He's a very selfish champion, so shouldn't be tied to needing help in the bot lane. But he's too sink or swim in other lanes to function, and I think Riot is probably right to not touch him in that regard, because it could go one way or the other. And I can imagine any changes which upset Draven players for the kinds of players they tend to be. But I think it would be net positive in terms of generating more excitement for Noxus, diversifying Noxus's offerings, and making just a little bit more, giving an opportunity for some thematic broadening among like the older cast of characters over there, namely Draven and Darius. I think what they've done with Darius over the years have been great, and Draven deserves the same love. If I were a writer working on the champion design team or Summoner's Rift team, this is the way that I propose doing that. Cool. So lastly, Nocturne. Nocturne can do me no wrong. The one thing I might change about him is his passive, but this is my favorite design. I think I really ate with this one. Basically, with Nocturne, it's the same thing where periodically he gets a Tiamat kind of thing around him. It does less damage, but it also applies on hits to everything. And if you attack a enemy champion or large monster, you get bonus attack speed, which increases for every large monster or enemy champion hit. So you don't heal anymore, and you do 10% more damage than your normal auto attacks, but it isn't like a huge nuke. It's mainly meant to give you bonus attack speed. So I took the idea of his W, which is the spell shield. I took the idea of activate this thing successfully for more attack speed. This is hit people, get more attack speed, and hit more people to get more. Take more of a risk, like surround yourself with more danger to get more attack speed. And then of course regular basic attacks reduce the cooldown of this, with the cooldown increasing against your desired target, aka large monsters and enemy champions. So this is pretty basic. Again, just shifting around. Like, I don't think the spell shield is a very compelling part of his kit. I don't think it's a very compelling or imaginative or sensible part of his fantasy. Like, when you think of like Shadow Demon that hearts your nightmares, do you see it surrounding itself with a ball of light to block your retaliation? Probably not. I think of a hash slinging slasher that just is berserk and attacks you and runs after you and tries to stab you to death at all cost. No defensive capabilities whatsoever. Anyway, Mage's Q, a little bit different. It slows really briefly, like a Trundle Q, whenever it hits you. And instead of doing AD, it does magic damage, and it does max health damage. So this would be Elise, no, not Elise Q. Elise Q is current. I don't remember. Varus W. So it does max damage. If you want to build for that, cool. But this is your only AP ability in the game, and you're not going to be executing, Cho'Gaths and Mundos the way Varus does, because it's kind of difficult to increase it. Anyway, the point here is that it marks enemies, same way the current one does. But instead of creating a trail on the ground, instead of the marked enemy leaving a trail on the ground, if an enemy is successfully hit, an enemy champion is successfully hit, then Nocturne becomes ghosted and gets bonus movement speed towards that enemy. So it gives them the same effects of betrayal without leaving, the visual noise on the floor. And then while that enemy is marked, all of his other abilities deal bonus magic damage, um, equal to what percent of their max health. So like, the first hit will do, let's see, 10% max health at rank 5, and then the other abilities will do a quarter of that each time they hit. So it's just echoing a tiny bit. It's kind of a little bit of like Gwen flavor, but I think this ability, I made this before Gwen was released. I can't think of other champions right now. I'm getting kind of tired. I don't really want to finish this up soon. Again, I already recorded this, but it didn't go through. So, yeah. And then I added an additional attack that if you hit a marked enemy with your Q and then hit them with your passive, you'll do you'll reslow them from Q's initial hit. So Q has like the it's a pass through projectile, but it like does like the trundle slow where you're like, you hit for a second. And hitting them with your Umbral Blades, your big Circus Tiamat slash, will cause that to happen again. Okay, so W. W is like Twitch Q now. It's like a combination of Twitch Q and Shaco Q. There's a little tiny bit delay, and then after the delay, Nocturne becomes invisible. Invisible like Shaco Q. After the invisibility, which is 2 seconds, he halfway transitions from male to female. Joking. He halfway transitions from like not on this mortal plane, like he is gone intangible completely, gone into the shadow realm, to like now he is like maybe like think of it like a shadow going like cruising in the ground, like a land shark. So he is like halfway tangible. So he goes from 2 seconds of invisibility after the short delay to his camouflage, long camouflage, exactly the same as Twitch Q. If you come close to him, you'll get like an exclamation point. If you go inside the circle, you'll see him. Anyway, when he's camouflaged for a long time, he gets a buff to his auto attack, making it like Echo E, so that when he auto attacks you, he teleports to you. So Shaco Q, pause, no teleportation, no dash, no blink, just pause, disappear, puff of smoke, to I was hiding, I'm sneaking around, and then jump scare, I'm here, you see me, do auto attack wind up, and then like the Sonic running meme, to he's right in front of your face, he's already hitting you. So a little bit of like a Rengar vibe there, where it's like you have the exclamation point, he's nearby, and the moment you think, oh, he's like right behind me, boom, you're getting hit, he's right behind you. And then the last thing is when he does the teleport auto attack, the Echo Blink auto attack, you're nearsighted like Graves W. So your vision is reduced to a small radius around you. But the nearsight only applies for a maximum of 2 seconds at max rank. Starts at 1 second. And it only you stay nearsighted if he stays close to you. So he has to stay right on top of you. So the darkness is coming from him. He's like expanding his body around you. Important. No dash involved in the initial cast of this ability. He can still get hit in invisibility. He's not becoming untargetable. It's not an on-demand dash, and this ability doesn't do any extra damage. It's not like Echo Key where it does bonus damage. He has no bonus damage on his auto attack. It's not a crit. It's not nothing. It's just range, and then the blind or the near sight in this case against the enemy. Okay. The near sight scales with rank such that at rank 1 you can see pretty far around you, and then at max rank it's like Quinn. I think it's exactly Quinn Q is what this is years ago, but I think it's what I gave it because I didn't want to give it anything smaller because that would be like very new, and he still has his near sight on his ult, and now it feels like too much power. Okay, so if he moves farther than 500 units away, which is the same distance as your minimum, your rank 1 near sight, then you get your sight back. It's like it's a tether. It would be coded as a tether. So all in all, Shaco Q turns to Twitch Q, turns to with Twitch Q you get Echo E, And then if you hit them, it's Karma W, but no damage. So Karma W, while you're still close to them, close enough to them, they can't see. That's it. No damage. Sounds like a lot happening, but I just think like it's like thematically it flows really clearly in my mind. Anyway, the last cool thing is your near sight buffed auto attack can be spread with your passive. So your circular slash that you get every 15 seconds in this case from your passive, if you either are in your W and your passive comes up and you teleport to someone and they're like grouped up with their teammates, then all of them are nearsighted. But if they all go in different directions, then you can only chase one probably. Oh no, if they all go in different directions, you can only chase one. So the ones that go perpendicular are going to lose the near sight. They're going to get their vision back because you have to stay in range of them. So there's the checks and balances there. Um, your E is a really simple ability. It is a combination of Vi Q and Kled E. It's like Kled's E, jousting, in terms of like, if I hit you, I can recast it. It's like Vi Q because it's a dash that you can charge up, and as you charge it, it goes farther. The only difference is that it does not do more damage with charging. It always does the same damage. Um, and it can be recast up to 2 times, but the recast can only have the minimum range. So only the first cast can be have its range increased by charging it. The recast are always essentially just tap cast, like Pantheon Q. So imagine like Pantheon could charge his Q, or imagine Pantheon's charge Q where you throw it. Imagine if you hit it, it lets you like stab 2 more times immediately. But instead of throwing a spear, you're just like running through someone and doing damage to them by doing that. The dash is also unstoppable, meaning the charge is 4 seconds. So if you want to stop Nocturne from dashing into you or dashing away, you have to stop the charge. You can, silence him, displace him, stun, snare him, whatever. And of course, it goes on cooldown. So yeah, the idea here of having a Kled jousting that goes 3 times is mainly around his Q that does the max health damage. It gives him more ability cast to apply that max health damage. Similar to Varus, you hit more, apply more blight stacks, the more max health damage you do when you pop the blight with an ability. If you hit with a Q and then E successfully all 3 times, at max range, you're going to be doing 30% max health. This might sound like a lot, but he's an assassin with no defensive spells now. In this case, he has no spell shield. Kayn, Blue Kayn, does a lot of burst damage. Nocturne would not be able to do the same amount of damage as quickly because he has to dash through you 3 times, and then probably also uses ult for its damage. However, the ult is also no. He probably has to use his ult to get on top of you in the first place, unless he's camouflaged and you don't have any pink wards. In which case, maybe you should have had more vision. 1 second. Throat so dry. Shoddy can't think. That's a vibe. Anyway, where was I? Yeah, this ability applies on hit effects. The on hit effects, of course, means that lifesteal also applies to it. So this ability, while it's in use, the dashes, think of it as like an auto attack replacement. Instead of like running after you like he does with his E, he like eases you, and while you're being feared, he's just like smacking you on the ass. That's what current Nocturne does, at least. Instead, he's going to get on top of you, either with his W or his ult, and then dash through you a few times. Interesting about dashing through, like you have to keep hitting the enemy to get the recast. So the first cast has to go through and hit an enemy, and then the second cast has to go through. So the first cast causes you to go through the first enemy, then the second cast is going to cause you to go back. In order to hit them again, you have to stay close enough to do that a third time. So the chances of you hitting 3 times are really low, generally speaking, but it's there if you can set that up correctly. Instead, it rewards you for proper planning ahead of time. And then, he's able to apply lifesteal through this auto attack replacement ability. And then the on-hit effect aspect of it, aside from lifesteal, will also reduce his passive cooldown. So once he's done using this ability and cycling through it, he goes back to auto attacking. Chances are he'll probably have his passive back up because the cooldown reduction from auto attacking applies to his E. That's that's pretty much it for this ability. And then for his alt, the damage component of it has been decreased. It just always, it's like Z alt. It just always does 100% of your total AD. So he dashes to you and then hits you um, with, a big smack. But there's some other interesting things that I changed about this ability. So this ability now is not instant cast. It's not I press the button and now no one can see. It's darkness that spreads from Nocturne's position to the farthest corners of the map, always over 1 second. So if you're standing on one edge of in fountain, the other fountain will be dark after 1 second. So there's a little bit of counterplay there. The enemy has more time to respond, but also the Nocturne themselves has more time to plan out what they want to do. Maybe they ult, and then as soon as it gets dark, the enemy champion flashes away, and they go, okay, well maybe I'm going to ult someone different now because they're kind of too safe, or maybe they're under turret now. Which gives both sides more time. Again, checks and balances. Next thing is the near sight is longer, so it's 6 to 8 seconds, 6 seconds at minimum, 8 seconds at max rank. And then Nocturne can, well, I'll talk about the passive. While everything is dark, Nocturne's passive takes down twice as fast. So there's, as you can see, there's lots of like on-hit synergy in this ability in this kit. That truthfully, if I were hired at Riot tomorrow and they were told me, do Nocturne, I told them here's what I have, here's my homework, and they say this is great. The one thing I might imagine they'd be like, oh, maybe change this one thing, or the thing that I'd be quickest to agree might need some toning down would be the on hit synergy. Not for the sake of like this character can use on hits really well, but more so for the sake of like his passive comes up a lot quicker probably with this kit. So there might be lots of room for abuse with, say, for instance, like crit builds. This is what happened with old Shyvana, or it wasn't like a problem, but this was like taken away from her probably intentionally. If she builds full crit, well, her Dragon Q is an auto attack that hits everyone in an area effect. So everyone's getting crit separately at the same time, as if like I were a ranged champion with Runan's Hurricane with no damage fall off. Or Jinx in this case, Jinx Rocket, where people are standing together, which is a lot of damage, and that is one of the intentional sharpnesses of that character. And Jinx is intended to be sharp. Jinx is balanced around having this unique power, unique capability. And she sacrifices things for it. So giving it to other champions for free is like silly. That's why certain items are balanced around like not how that's why lots of certain items are balanced around how good they are on the best case instead of how good they are for everyone, because the best case is sometimes too much of a price to pay for how unfair they are versus how well they can make anyone else. Think of like rapid fire cannon, static shiv, ADC, marksman items. Now that we think about it, things that are oftentimes either balanced around crit can be abused that way. Anyway, tangent. So cool new passive is that his passive cooldown reduction is doubled. So instead of me hitting you and then I get 3 seconds off for hitting a champion, I'm gonna get 6 seconds off for my passive. So the idea is that like during his passive or his ult, he's kind of like enhanced. Everything's dark, more shadows everywhere. He's in like super true form Belveth. He's berserked. So he's going to be doing his Tiamat radial slash more frequently while he's in melee range. And his W, or his near sight, instead of near sighting you, it fears you. Which, I mean, I wanted to put a fear somewhere because he has a fear, and that's like the biggest part of like his thematic. He's supposed to be scary. I think it doesn't make. There's some argument there. I was like, oh, like his alt near sights you, but then like he can use his W to like make your vision radius even smaller. He near sights you even further. But I think it's just as compelling. It's worth sacrificing power for in other places. If it's like, no, he actually gets hard TC, but he only gets it during his ult, and it's a fear, which you're going to be running away from him, but like you're still moving, but you can't control it, but he still has to like follow you. I think fear like works a lot here. Kind of what I was saying about like his jousting ability. Like if he wants to do damage, he has to like in a way like run away from you to get the most hits. and then risk like getting too far away with the second hit, which has to go back through you, in order to have the option or the ability to maybe get the third hit. Anyway, that's that. So yeah, a fear. Something I might do is maybe in another pass, I might also reduce the fear. So I'd reduce the on hits energy for his passive radial attacks, mainly because again I was worrying about abusing crit items and crit procs on that. I might reduce the fear the fear duration. His W's near sight is 1 to 2 seconds. I would probably change the fear to half of that. So instead of 0.5 to 1.5, I think it said. No, 1 to 1.5. Okay, yeah, it's an alt ability. I would make it 0.5, 0.75, and 1.0, so half effectively um, of a fear. So it's like a really, like a Hecarim fear, really quickly. Um, just because, like, kind of the point of this redesign was to take away his hard CC, because if you can't CC him twice with his, in the current Nocturne, you have to CC him twice or do something. And theoretically, you have to hit him twice, one of which has to be a CC ability. You have to use 2 abilities on him to stop him. And then if you can't, he gets to free hit you for a few seconds. So he suffers this double jeopardy problem. And I talked about this a long time ago in some of my TikTok videos. Huge design like taboo. I think it's like, yeah, this character would not be released in 2027, because he's just committing too many sins. He's unfair by design, and not just like he gets to be unique and other people can't do things like him, but like he is designed with the intention to do things that feel like are unfair. They are unfair to the enemy, and they take away power from the enemy, and are very checkmatey. Like if you are finding yourself in the right position, there oftentimes is nothing that you can do. That's just not really. That's not the most fun. I think it's not fun for me as a player. I don't want. I don't like to beat up on a weak person. I like to have. I have to struggle a little bit. I'd like to have to work for my dinner, so to speak. And yeah, I just think that this kit is extremely fun. Shout out to the person that I credited in this essay. And yeah, that's it for my champion rework tier list. I'm glad I could muster up the energy to do this again. This ended up being over an hour. Didn't expect that, but I'm totally open to it. Check me out my Patreon for more essays and also sneak peeks on upcoming videos. And I'm glad to be back. So thank you, if you made it to the end of this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day and are safe wherever you are. And please let me know in the comments what you think about anything that I've said today, anything you'd like to see in the future. Take care.